So thank you very much, and thanks very much for having me here today. I guess just listening to Preet's video, I've probably got some different messages actually, because my role is really different. I'm a councillor, so I cover a much smaller area and a much fewer number of residents. But I've also taken quite a different approach as well, I think, in terms of building the team and running an election campaign, because for me, it was something which I had got planned over quite a long period of time, whereas hers was a snap election, plus I had a bit of a different philosophy. So I'll give a bit of an introduction as to who I am and how I got into this first, and then you'll understand a bit of the difference. So I've only been not involved in politics for a couple of years. I joined the Green Party in 2014, and one of the first things I did was not get selected as a candidate. So we had a by-election in Edinburgh where I thought, oh well, I'll see if I can get selected as a candidate, but I wasn't successful because I wasn't well networked. I didn't know enough of the party members. And I didn't really know an awful lot about what was involved, but I thought, well, it'll give me experience and I'll learn about how to stand. And then I got really heavily involved, basically. So the by-election where I wasn't selected as a candidate, I ran a huge part of the campaign, which was ultimately slightly unsuccessful. We missed out on the seat very marginally, but it meant that I learned a huge amount about how to run a good campaign and what it would take to build a good team to run my own campaign if I wanted to do so in the future. Yeah, what I did was I decided that in the ward that I actually live in, which was not where the by-election had been, I would volunteer to be one of the coordinators of my local team. And at that point, there wasn't really a local team. So we had a really large party membership, but we didn't really have any kind of coordination, even though it was the city centre in Edinburgh. We didn't really have an awful lot of coordination around what activities were happening there. It was just a small part of the overall branch. So the Edinburgh and West Lothian branch was very organised, but the very small area in the city centre wasn't massively organised. So it fell to me and another volunteer to basically bring together all the members who were in that area that were interested in getting more actively involved. And what happened was, at the same time, we were running the Scottish government election campaign for Holyrood. And so the city centre was a really critical part of that. And it meant that I was able to kind of activate members and build the team at the same time as practicing some of those team skills and making sure that people were learning about how to campaign and how to get on board with things at the same time, because we had this, you know, massive campaign to run. And then on the back of that, we had the EU referendum and we had the snap general elections. There were lots of chances to do a lot of campaigning for elections. And I guess, you know, it depends where you are in the election cycle whether that's possible or not. But on reflection, when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I wanted to also sort of point out that it doesn't need to be election campaigning to kind of go through those motions and take those actions. It can be an issue-based campaign that's local in your area, or it can be a policy that you're hoping to campaign on. And that would do the same thing, basically, where you're basically trying to bring together people to you know, focus around a certain campaign and carry out campaigning activity. So how I managed to do it was we have roughly, it sort of oscillates, you know, the membership, you know, goes up and down, but we have about 150 members in my ward. So my ward is the city centre of Edinburgh, and it's about 2 miles wide. We've got a residential population of about 30,000, and our membership is, you know, it kind of changes a lot because there's a lot of rented accommodation. So people will live in the area for a while and then move away again. And you have to always be reinvigorating the membership. And you have to always be checking whether people still are, you know, in the area or not, and whether they still want to be involved. So there's a lot of time spent contacting people on your membership list and just saying, you know, are you interested in getting involved in what we're doing locally? This is what we're doing just now. And one of the things which I found was that there were quite a lot of people on our membership list who had joined the party, but they were dormant members. They weren't, they would pay their membership fee, but they didn't particularly think that they wanted to get involved, or they didn't know how to get involved. And so I found that phoning them didn't work, because people tend not to answer the phone to the number that they don't recognise. So, you know, in the end, I started texting people and saying, I'm going to ring, or would you like to ring me? This is who I am, this is why I'm calling. And that worked quite well, actually. But I did find that you just had to persevere, and you had to kind of keep trying and, you know, ask different questions. And it was also about increasing the membership as well. So we, you know, we obviously need to constantly be thinking about our membership numbers and doing membership drives. So anytime that we were out campaigning, I was always aware that another sort of question or prompt when we were talking to people was, you know, have you thought about joining the party? Is that something that you'd be interested in? And trying to gain new members as well. That's another way to really grow your team, and make sure that it's people who personally resonate with what you're working on, and what they've heard from you when you've been campaigning. But the team that I eventually did build was a core of a few people who really provided some very specific skills to the team. But in total, it was maybe about 20 people. And it was interesting because when I was thinking about what to do, one of the other Green councillors said to me, you know, it's entirely possible to win an election in the council here, because they're multi-member wards. The way that it works, we've got single transferable vote in Scotland for our local elections, and it means that actually you don't need to have a massive, great big team. So Preet's talking about, you know, quite a big operation, I think, for a single seat election. But for a multi-member ward election that I was going through, you really need to have a core team of people who are dedicated and are able to spend time on it. But you know, you don't need more than sort of 5 or 10 people who are really focused on getting that election result. So I sort of took that to mean, well, it's doable, you know, and it's something which I can achieve. So I don't need to worry about not perhaps building a big enough team or a strong enough team. I can still win this election without, you know, a massive, great big amount of resource and money. I also had a lot of help from family and friends. They were supportive in the sense that they would make sure that I was fed. So if I was out all day campaigning, one of my friends quite often turned up with a hot lunch for me, you know, and said, you know, you need to eat proper home-cooked food. And, you know, actually that's quite a big part of having a supportive team, is knowing that people have, you know, are making sure that you are looking after yourself as well. But one of the ways in which I think I differed a little, well, quite a lot from the way that Preet organised things, is that I quite quickly saw that there were other people in the Green Party who were trying to take a very direct approach to their campaigns and their team building, where they would create a plan and then try to seek volunteers to follow the roles in their plan. And that wasn't always very successful, because if you've got volunteers who are doing a lot of this work, they don't necessarily want to do the thing that you've asked. They might want to do something else, or they might have slightly different skills. So I took a slightly different approach. I asked people what, you know, I set out a high level objective and said, you know, we want to hold these meetings, or we want to take a campaign out to certain residents, and this is the strategy of who we're trying to target. What can you bring to that, and what would you like to do, and where are your interests and your skills? And that meant that people were doing stuff that they genuinely were going to follow through and complete the tasks. They were less likely to drop out of what they were being asked to do, and it actually meant that we had got quite an interesting balance of people in the end, because I did have an interesting and varied membership in the party. That, you know, you necessarily don't know everybody's skills until you ask them what they can do. One of the members of the team who was a real, you know, a really important member was somebody who did social media in their day job, and I hadn't really expected that social media would be a big part of my campaign, because it wasn't something which I'm terribly good at. I go on it for fun, but I didn't really know how to campaign through it. And he actually got me to the point where I was making video clips that we published online, and they were actually pretty professional looking, because he did such a good job. And we tried a few things out, but that was down to him. And if I had asked for what I wanted and maybe not specify, you know, it was the fact that I didn't specify these things too strongly that I think made it quite successful. And yeah, so the sort of the other key people that were in my team were, I had somebody who was an ex-councillor, which was hugely helpful because he was able to, you know, provide me with a lot of support when I was going to hustings, when I was preparing for different events and meetings. He was also able to help me to start to do casework before I became elected, because if you start to do casework for your residents, it can be quite a powerful demonstration that you're going to be a good councillor when you are elected. And he was just a massive source of inspiration and knowledge for me. And then I had a lot of people who were working behind the scenes to coordinate things, like coordinating our leafleting effort, which was all done by volunteers. Because the amount of money that you can spend in a council election is quite low. You know, the cap on it means that you can't post out a lot of stuff. So all of our leafleting was delivered by hand, apart from a postal vote letter. So we had a massive operation that was, you know, sort of getting all our leaflets in, creating different delivery routes, making sure that everybody knew exactly where they were to go and what they were to do. And, you know, that's a huge piece of work. So, you know, having somebody who's able to take on that, you know, that was a big commitment. And I had a squad of people who were out canvassing as well. And again, that was something which I don't think a massive number of party members were hugely keen on. We don't have such a strong sort of canvassing culture in the Scottish Greens, something which I'm quite keen to try and build. But you know, I thought it was important to try and get people to do that if they could and if they would. So we did have a bit of a canvassing operation in the end, but that was something where I was sort of gently building the skills a little bit. And I think that's another reflection for me, is that all the time I was trying to think, how am I building people's skills for the future, and what kind of a team am I building, not just for this election, but for other elections where we're going to be campaigning in the same area? Because one thing which, for example, we set aside consciously was fundraising during the campaign period. We didn't, you know, we needed to fundraise, obviously, but we decided not to try really hard to learn that skill during a time when we were actively out campaigning on the doorstep and doing street stalls and so on, because it would take our focus away from it, and we could fundraise later and we could learn that skill, you know, later on. And I think that that's helped, because providing that kind of direction, saying, you know, we're going to do certain things but not others, means that you're not diverting your sort of finite resources to things that you can't necessarily cover. And the other support that I got, which I think is worth covering, which I found really helpful, and I don't obviously know what the structures are in other political parties, but in the Greens in Scotland, we've got the Young Greens, and they were hugely helpful for me in my campaign, because a lot of young people obviously live in the city centre, and there's a lot of students, a lot of young people living in shared flats. And so I worked with them to create their own materials that linked to the messages that I was campaigning on, but were their own. And they ran their own kind of mini campaign that crossed a couple of wards where a lot of the young people in Edinburgh lived. And that was hugely helpful, because they were reaching out to a piece of, you know, a segment of the electorate that I probably wouldn't connect that well with, because I'm 40, so I'm not, you know, going out in cafes and pubs and things in the same way that they are. So it was really great to have them as part of the team, but sort of doing their own thing. And I also had a lot of support from just, you know, what I'd done in the run-up to thinking that I was going to stand for election was get involved in a lot of different projects in the Green Party, so that I had a really wide network. So these people weren't necessarily my team as such, but it was people who were advising me, or people who I could go to for help or feedback, or I could call up and, you know, just kind of sound, you know, an idea with. So I was involved in the Women's Network, I was involved in policy development, I volunteered at conference, I was involved in the local branch, I came into the Green Councillor's office and volunteered and shadowed them. So, you know, just loads of different, like, wide-ranging different experiences that just meant that I was pretty well networked, and I think that stands me in good stead now as well. So I think, again, like a lot of the things that I've done to build that team and that support now mean that once I'm in office and I'm doing my job as a councillor, I've got a lot of support in the party, and I can quite quickly think, who would I go to for help for different things, or who would I connect with to make sure that the things that I'm working on are coordinated with other cities that might have similar issues or policies that we're trying to change. And then I suppose sort of the last thing is any tips on asking for the help that you need. I'm really bad at asking for help, actually, which I think is fairly common. So I'm not sure I have an awful lot of words of wisdom on that one, but I do think that one thing that helped me was to depersonalize it a little bit. So when I was asking for help, I was usually saying, I think that we want to get a Green councillor elected in this ward. It's important because it'll increase the number of councillors here. Our group will be bigger. We will be able to do more in the next session because we'll have a larger group. We'll have more influence. It's important to have a Green council in the city centre because the issues here are X, Y, and Z. But depersonalising it in that way and making it about increasing the numbers or getting a person in, for me, I found it easier then to ask for that support and that help because it wasn't necessarily about me. But on the flip side of that, one of the things which I was advised, and I never really quite nailed, but I think is still good advice, is to, one of the questions that you get asked the most when you're campaigning is, why did you decide to do this? And it's a really hard question to answer because actually the reason that you decide to do it is because you want to do good in the world, but that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear something personal about you, about your politics, and why you personally are motivated. And I find that quite hard because there's so many different reasons. But one of the councillors that I actually was mentored by said to me, it's good to find a story, something which has got a wide resonance that people, when they hear it, will understand that that's a reason. And her story was to do with her daughter having been, she came home from school apparently very excited because she got the prize for being the best in her class that week. And she was super excited because it meant she had a cushion that she could sit on when the class was sitting in the corridor. And she said, why is my daughter excited that she's having to win this prize to get a cushion to sit on in the corridor when all the other kids are sitting on the floor? And why are they sitting in the corridor to do certain classes? And what's that about? And it made her interested in education policy and making changes. And I think a story like that kind of encapsulates why you're interested in doing these things is another really important thing, because it provides a focus for people. They can understand a bit about you, about your motivations. It tells people about your backgrounds. It gives them a sense that they start to feel that they know you. They can connect with you personally, and all that kind of stuff I think is actually quite important. And we're quite quick to, put up barriers almost to kind of protect ourselves when we stand for election. But actually a story like that told in the right context is quite a helpful thing, because it starts to take down those barriers, but in a way that you've got control over that, and you can control how much of yourself you're kind of giving out to people. So I thought it was quite a useful tip, even though I didn't quite manage to implement it myself. So in summary, key points of what I wanted to say: you don't need a big team, I don't think, if you're fighting a small election. If it's a council election, and especially ones where it's a multi-member ward, it doesn't have to be a massive operation. You can win a seat. I'm proof of that. Personal contact's really important, making as much contact with people as possible, and keeping trying if you don't actually always get a yes first time. Thinking about your strategy for volunteer management and how to get the best out of people. And it might be my approach, it might not be, but having a bit of a think about how you get the best out of volunteers. And they're not your staff, but they are giving up their spare time. Campaigning is a great way to build a team. It's just really good practice for you. Don't wait until it's your campaign to build that team. Try and get involved in lots of different things to meet lots of different people, because you never know when that support is going to come in handy, or when their skills are going to be things that you want to call on. and tell people why you are involved and why you're doing this. And just in closing, I guess building the team doesn't finish. I'm still doing it now, and I've been in my job now for just under a year. It'll be a year in May, and I'm still thinking, how do I make sure I develop this team more? How do I, help them to continue to be good, and how do we grow?